Welcome to CISO's Insiders Podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Welcome, everybody. In today's episode, I will be speaking to Marc Ashworth, a Senior VP and CISO at First Bank out of St. Louis, Missouri, I want to say. St. Louis,
Yep.
Missouri, yeah. Marc has been in the industry for 25 years, dealing with both cybersecurity, physical security. I think prior to that, you had a few roles in the IT and security architecture space. You were a part or even led a business and departmental strategy. You were involved in budgeting, project management, and I have seen you as a public speaker and on multiple videos. You're also a member of the St. Louis chapter of InfraGard and a lifetime member of FBI Citizens Academy. You hold a bunch of certificates such as CISSP, CISM, CIRISC, and more. And as I mentioned before moving to the security space, I believe you grew from the IT space, but I'm sure you could do a much better job in introducing yourself. So if you want to step in, that would be a pleasure.
All right. Yeah. So thanks for having me. Be glad to, talk here. So, I started off actually in development in the mid-range on the AS400 and then moved my way over into server management and PC desktops and networks and eventually started maintaining and help deploying and architecting in Fortune 500 companies. And then settled into healthcare for about half a dozen years, a little bit more, and then also in aerospace before getting into finance here with the banking. I was been in management for 15 plus years, and approaching now, and hard to believe, almost 30 years in IT in general. So definitely been through it all. I've been very technical, really up to this point here, and with this position. I was the guy out there, doing the updates on the servers, maintaining all those sort of things, is all the way up to, about 3 or 4 years ago. So I've lived what everyone else is doing, so I understand it, and managing networks and everything, and pushing out code and all that stuff. So I got a really broad background, as well as from a business perspective and project management side of things. It's very broad understanding and learning curve and everything that I've done. So it's been a great career.
Yeah, and not only from a technical perspective, from what I understand. So you moved across industries, right? You mentioned the health space and then fintech, which is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's pretty uncommon, right? To be moving between industries.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of advantage to doing that, because then, there's a lot of operational efficiencies that you learn from, like healthcare or from manufacturing or, fintech. And so it does bring in different perspectives. Now, granted, there's a learning curve that you have to do when you move to a new industry, but I did have, when I was consulting years ago, I did work and did some pen testing and technical audits back in the early 2000s for several banks. So I did have banking experience, just not full time that someone else might have had, which I think, as my career has kind of shown here at the bank, and it's really brought in a different perspective to IT and security and the business to really kind of help out, and so I think it's been a good experience overall.
Yeah. Okay, and thank you for that introduction. Usually I like to start with a couple of icebreaker questions here. My signature two are around your marital status and your favorite drink.
All right, so I've been married now Let's see here. It will be 30 years next year. So, so I've been with my lovely wife for 29 years here. And my favorite drink would probably be a white chocolate mocha. That's probably my favorite one right now. So, and the
So,
bad part is I'm on a diet, so I can't have it right now. So that's
so white chocolate mocha, is that the one you have in Starbucks, you mean?
Starbucks or local coffee shop. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Is the local coffee shop there, is that something with Malibu, Caribbean Malibu, I want to say, or something like that? Is that correct or not?
Uh, the one that's real close to me is a place called Exit 11, and they got really good mochas
Okay.
there. It's a Colombian type coffee, but yeah, they're pretty good.
Okay. White chocolate mocha. That's the
Yeah.
first. Uh, okay. Let's, and the intent of this podcast and this interview is basically to get to know you better. So I'm less interested in, like technical achievements or anything specific around compliance or even cybersecurity. I'm more interested in learning about your path, your career path, your, big decisions, achievements, failures, basically to gain some insights, and to be able to digest it and deliver it to our listeners that might be able to learn something from your experience.
Sure.
So let's dive right in. If there's one thing you wish you had known before you began your career, what would that be?
So plan for 5 years at a time, because really, and you would hear the question during the interview, what's your plan in 5 years, but your life's going to change, your career is going to change, your interest is going to change as you get into your career and you start looking. When we were talking about my background earlier, I started off in development. I thought development was like the coolest thing. And then got into consulting, and I was doing development and consulting, but then I started going to different clients and learning about their networks and deploying servers and working on PCs and learning about their businesses. And then I got to the point where I couldn't sit still 8 hours a day coding anymore. That just bored me. I liked that, that constant exposure. So, and then I eventually made it into management, but then I stayed, technical and learning different things, deploying different things. So, plan 5 years at a time. Your life's going to change both personally and professionally. And so to expect that you're going to be doing the exact same thing for 30 years, don't plan on that.
That's one of the questions I keep asking before I onboard employees. I used to be asking that, like, what's your plan for the next 5 years, or where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? Because yeah, I do feel that on one hand, I do feel that you can't really plan like 30 years in advance, but I personally, I do believe in long-term goals, long-term goals. I believe that once you have a goal, you keep striving to reach it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but and if we could touch on your biggest failure and what did you learn from it? Could you nail it down to like a single one or a couple of those?
Yeah, I think my biggest failure was I worked in a, a couple of hostile environments. One of them was very politically hostile environment, so they were pulling me one way or another. And the other one was just, it was kind of one of those where if even if it wasn't something that could easily be controlled, there was always someone coming into my office and yelling because the systems were running, it took 2 seconds to click versus 1 second to click. That's sort of goofy things. And it was just really hostile, and just not recognizing that and getting out of that sooner. I think that was probably one of my biggest failures, and hoping that if I'm ever in that situation again, I recognize it soon enough to actually get out of there. And because then once you do, all this weight is off your shoulder and you could actually think and be creative, and uh, you're not pushing that uh, hostility down to others and those sort of things. And so yeah, I think that was my biggest failure, is not recognizing I was in a bad environment.
Hmm. Okay, so the failure was not the fact that you were working in a hostile environment, but the fact that you didn't get out soon enough, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that I didn't recognize it until I was in way too deep.
Yeah, I get what you mean, and that was in one of your position in the IT space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because this usually used to happen in more in IT, I think.
Mhm.
Okay, and having touched on that, on the biggest failure, what would you say your biggest accomplishment was?
So that there, I would say that's my family. I mean, my kids and everything they're doing, and my wife, and career wise, yeah, there's been a lot of great things. Doing these sort of things, I think, is really good. And the writing and public speaking, and obtaining CISO, those sort of things. I think those are all great accomplishments. But really, compared to my family, that's to me the biggest thing.
Okay, thank you. Um, and if there's any advice you could give out to a professional, a practitioner that wanted to pursue a career similar to yours, what would that be?
So there's a couple approaches from being like a CISO, and some of them are very business oriented and not very technical. And then there's the approach kind of I took. I was very technical and with management background, and going that route. So myself, if you are an analyst or an IT person or wherever you might be in your career, you need to learn about the business. You need to stay up to date. Security changes on a daily basis. Development changes some, but not very often. And some people might argue with me on that. IT itself changes at a fairly rapid pace, but security changes daily. And so to know that, and the willingness to stay educated, to do those extra things that you need to do to stay up to date, you need to do that. If you're going to get into security in general, um, if you're going to make that leap, if you're going over from IT or graduating from school, one of the things I ask all the candidates is, what do you do to stay up to date? What do you do to stay up and continue learning on what's going on? What magazine articles, online or physical, it doesn't matter. Most of them's online. Are you reading? What podcasts, security podcasts, are you listening to on a regular basis? What readings are you doing? Those sort of things is what you have to do to stay up to date in the security business and to be able to move up. And then, always keep the business in mind first. So we don't want to be a hamper to the business, but we want to enable the business to continue to grow, to do the things that they need to do, but we just need to make sure that it's done securely. And so, it shouldn't be that office of no. And if it is, then you're probably not very well liked within the business from that perspective. So.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. But let me ask you this. So when you interview a potential employee or a potential candidate, actually, so would you be more inclined to hire someone that knows more about the business in your space, or would you actually think it's beneficial for someone outside of the industry? And as you mentioned, like you moved across industries, right? You were in the health space before moving to the banking industry. So would you think that is actually an advantage, or would you feel that you need someone that had some expertise in the banking industry?
Well, I think the answer is it depends on the position, right? So if you're doing someone that if you're hiring or interviewing someone that is very heavy in the fraud side, you would want someone that's more in the banking business and understands the different types of fraud that's occurring in the
Yeah.
financial sector. But if you're hiring an analyst that's looking for, anomalies on the network, and that's where, as long as they have some sort of technical background that's associated with the position, it doesn't matter in my mind whether you were in financials or in manufacturing or wherever. So it's more about what your drive is, what's your passion for security, and your willingness to learn. And then next would be what your technical skills are to get into the position.
Okay, thank you. And what do you feel about the tension between, being a CISO? Okay, let me rephrase. What do you feel about the tension between information security, cybersecurity, and compliance in IT, and specifically around the potential conflict of interest of someone holding a position of a CISO intermingled with IT responsibilities, or either reporting to an IT function?
So there's a lot of synergies there, and you can have an argument that the CISO should report up to risk or should report up to the president of the company or to the CIO. And there's advantages, and it depends on the organization and the culture and the overall structure off there. My personal opinion is that it should be reporting either to the CIO or to the president of the organization. And as the organization grows, then the CISO should probably report up to the president, because there's oversight that's being done across the organization, and uh, everything is technical in the companies anymore. There's really very few parts of the business that that IT doesn't have some sort of influence over. So having that relationship with the CIO, and to be able to work with the IT group to make sure that there's proper governance there and reducing the risk in IT, as well as being able to work with the business groups and reduce the risk there, and or provide governance around the risks that could happen that's associated with it. And it also depends on what sort of areas that the CISO is responsible for, whether they have privacy in there, compliance, maybe physical security. All those different areas could roll up to the CISO, and it all depends on the organization and the responsibilities too, on really where that structure should go to. Either which way, the CISO should have some sort of either dotted line or something to the
Yeah.
board, and should have a seat, or not necessarily a seat, but it all depends on the organization again. But should at least have a voice with the board, and the board should be talking to the CISO about those risks and around it, because cybersecurity is one of the number one things out there that's going to affect the organization.
Yeah, and you actually answered my next question, because I was about to ask you, because you mentioned that you a CISO can and might be a subordinate of the CIO, but then my next question would have been, okay, but then how do you make sure your voice is heard with leadership? So yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And being in the cybersecurity industry and growing from IT, and being in a management position for the last 15 years, what would you say were the best resources that have helped you along the way?
To become a CISO?
I think to support you in your career. Was it like, academia, self-learning, mentors, influentials?
Sure. For me, it was a lot of self-learning, and I was one of the first in the state of Missouri to get CISSP years ago. And unfortunately, back then it was harder to get the CPEs. And so I let it expire, and I had to take that test again. So that was my drive to get back into security, because it was something that was kind of hanging over me. And so maybe that's one of my biggest regrets there, is letting that thing expire. Uh, but so once I got that, I was just in, a full, like a train wasn't going to stop, and I was going to keep driving more and more into security, and got the CISM and C-Risk, and I did Security Plus to help encourage one of my teammates and stuff. And so, and really that's what got me into IT in the first place, was security. And I kind of lost track of that over the years, getting into management and staying in IT. And so, just bringing that back, because that was really what really drove me. The movie War Games. That I walked out of the theater and I was like, that's what I want to do. So that's and so that's really where it kind of all started, and I'm just glad I came full circle and got back down and around to it. So.
What's the one common myth about your profession that you want to debunk?
I think some people might think IT or security is easy, and it's not. I think people think that it's, you go in there and you get your degree and you're done, but you have to stay up, you have to keep learning, and the other thing too, you gotta have thick skin. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, you don't your teams themselves might get a lot of kudos, but you usually hear more negative things than you hear positive things about IT, right? From the company, and so it's always IT's fault, those sort of things, and you'll hear some that are appreciative, and but for the most part, you have to have thick skin. So.
Yeah, so IT and security is not easy, and you have to have thick skin. And yeah,
Right.
and I think it's relevant both for cybersecurity and IT, right?
Mhm.
Because you get a lot of heat, and it doesn't matter like what you do. I mean, I'm not saying all the time, but I have seen it happen a lot. Um, can you share your thoughts about the main concerns that CISOs nowadays have in general?
Well, I think one of the things out there right now is protecting the remote workers. With over the past year, the change and shift in business and everything, the you know, it, depending on how prepared and what controls you had in place, remote workers are providing new efficiencies around that. I think is critical. And the overall threat landscape is continuing to grow, and the fraud and scams are continuing to grow, and so it's really keeping up with those areas and ransomware. uh, Making sure that your environment is as protected as possible, and preventing lateral movement. Those are all, I think, big things to be worried about right now.
Yeah, and what about supply chain, by the way?
Yeah, supply chain, that one's a difficult one, but if you put in the right segmentation policies, and maybe micro segmentation, in order to try to reduce that risk of a compromised supply chain attack like SolarWinds, that's going to reduce your risk, but there's not really a single silver bullet that's going to really stop that from happening.
Yeah, of course, there's not. Okay, and can you share a bit about your daily routine, like where you get your updates from, like if you have any favorite blogs, podcasts, newsletters, etc.
Yeah. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I also check, a lot of the business, the regular sites, your Fox, CNN, those sort of things too, just to look at, updates from a business, or what's happening in the political environments, because the physical will affect the virtual. And so knowing that something's happening over Iran or Russia or China can help lead to what type of attacks that you might experience. Krebs on Security is a good one. SC Magazine's a good one. ZDNet, Bleeping Computer, all good sites. CIO Review, and a few others along that line. Security Now is my favorite podcast with Steve Gibson. And he's one that that's one I've probably listened to the most over probably the last 7-8 years. So it's a good weekly podcast. IC Stormcast is another good one, and which is done by Sands. There's Hacking Humans. That's a good one. The CISO series is another good one. Defense in Depth, which is part of that. I recommend all my vendors, if you want to better learn on how to, work with the CISO or CIO, listen to the CISO series, vendor relationship podcast. Blogs, I really don't read a lot of blogs or anything, but it's more of the newsletters and alerts from, US CERT, those sort of areas.
Mm-hmm. And is the CISO series, is that run by David Spark?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm also a subscriber to that. Anything you can share, again, in general outlines about budget planning in the industry, like, 2021 as opposed to 2019, 2020? Did you see a shift?
Yeah, I think there's a shift around, again, we talked a little bit about around the remote worker side. So I think you'll see a shift around some endpoint protections. Also, uh, depending on how long this is going to last and what maybe the organization decides on for, how permanent remote workers will be, shoring up, VPN type of access or remote access into the systems. I think there will be some budget changes or planning that'll be done around that to, maybe look at, some of the SASE type of solutions to make it easier, always on VPNs, those sort of technologies. And then the associated forensics and IPS and IDSs that'll needed to help monitor for that.
Sure, and actually, I have a follow-up question on that. What's your take on what's going to happen? Do you think, companies will move into a hybrid model then, like allowing employees to stay remotely for partial time, like for part-time then?
Yeah, I think the one thing was easily figured out was that the myth that companies couldn't be efficient working remotely, I think that's been blown away, right? I think a lot of companies have figured out that, hey, that we are as efficient, if not more efficient, because of it. I think at least in the short term, maybe in the next 5 years, there will probably be less in-office space or office space that's going to be required. It could be I think there will be some workers that will probably be permanently remote, and then others would be in a hybrid mode, and then probably a smaller percentage will be actually in office going forward. At least, I think this is going to be a cycle type thing. I think this is probably going to be a 2 to 5 year where this is going to be pretty heavy remote, and then probably in 5 years it could be all back in the office, again, as COVID's forgotten about and everything else, and hopefully we forget about COVID and 2020. So
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because for us, when we were founded 12 years ago, we were actually a 100% remote company, and then after a few years, we took up our first space. But then, now for the past almost year and a half now, we've been completely remote. Uh, but um, but yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to see what will happen with that.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask you another follow-up question about the maturity of the industry. Did you feel that our industry, like cybersecurity and compliance, you think it has matured tremendously? Do you think we still have like a lot of work to do, or where do you position ourselves as an industry right now?
Yeah, I think we have matured over, the past few years, especially. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. There's such an influx of products that's out there, and uh, there's going to be, I think there's going to be some consolidation that's going to occur. The endpoint side of of monitoring and protection. I think Microsoft is going to be incorporating a lot of those basics into their Windows Defender product more and more. So I think you're going to see less of that. And then it's going to be more around providing additional forensics and observation of what's happening on the endpoint, while Microsoft is bringing in, better application control features. They have some in there right now, but nothing to the level of McAfee Solid Core or Carbon Black Protect or anything along that line. I think that's going to continue to merge, much like they've done with antivirus. Defender's probably, it's up there just with the top of all of them from an AV standpoint. And with their ATP solution, now they have EDR capabilities and XDR capabilities, and as more and more goes up to the cloud, having that overall exposure is going to continue. So I think there's going to be a lot more in the ability to analyze what's happening, and I hope there's more maturity and options around the SIM type of platforms and capabilities, because as the industry is changing to these XDR formats to be able to get better analysis in there, because no matter what, SOC needs to have some sort of single point to be able to do that monitoring, do the analytics, do the have that intelligence of what's going on in the enterprise, and you can't have them go into multiple different places to find that data because you're going to miss something. So having that one-stop application to pull in all the analytics of traffic and logs and user behavior and device behavior and all that sort of things, I'm hoping that's where we continue to mature at, because right now I think it's lacking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the sense of you're speaking about consolidation of aggregators and basically consolidating of those specific products that are related to the endpoint, then to make it easier to analyze and digest information that you intake, right?
Right. Yeah, and when I'm saying endpoint, not just the PCs, laptops, but servers,
Servers as well. Yeah.
PAS, all those things, getting wherever there's, systems running that's, connecting to the network, getting that analytics, I think is critical from a SOC perspective.
Okay. Thank you. And fortunately, the noise outside subsided a bit. But so I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about, vendors. If you put yourself in the shoes of a vendor just for a moment, what is it that you would do when looking to engage with a new customer?
Yeah, I know the vendors are under, especially in the startup companies, are under a lot of pressure to, get the sales and, get the contacts and stuff. But really, for me, the more successful ones are the ones that are building the relationship first and not just trying to sell something. If a vendor is reaching out to me on LinkedIn, a lot of times, the first thing, it's not even hello, here's my product, here's what, you need this, I need 15 minutes of your time. And I don't have 15 minutes for 100 vendors that reach out to me every day. Right. So, provide, if you're going to do that, provide the information on the product. And then if the CISO or the manager or whoever is dealing with that, they have the information available to them then at that point, and can reach out if they have something on there. But don't assume that you know what their problem is when you haven't even talked to them. So build that relationship first, and then the sales will come. So some of my favorite salespeople, when we meet, we don't even necessarily talk about business, but then when I need something, they're the ones that I'm going to say, hey, do you have a solution for this, or do you have a solution for that? And that's whenever they get the sale then.
Mm-hmm. So build the relationship first. That's that's what you would do. And out of all those sales pitches that you encounter, is there like any one or two that really stood out? I mean, in being most annoying, I forgot to add that.
Yeah. So there's two of them that I get very frequently. One is whenever it's the first time they send me something, but they will make it sound like it's the we've talked in the past. And it's like, I've never even heard of your product, so how could we have talked? And they'll even have it, in the email, the cold call email, they will have it as a reply, RE in the subject line. And it's like, okay, well, no. And if it's, the third, fourth, or fifth time you're having to send me an email and I haven't responded, I'm not going to respond to you at that point. But I think the most comical one has been whenever for a first approach, they sent me a calendar invite, assuming that I was going to accept that calendar to meet with them. And it's like, no, that's an instant delete right there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think you described the common techniques here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that you are then looking for in a vendor? And I think you answered that partially. I'm assuming it's around building relationship, but if there's any specific story you wanted to share about that.
Yeah, I think the best vendors that I work with, they're honest. That they'll, if their product that they're selling doesn't meet my needs, they are upfront. They don't waste my time. They don't waste my team's time. It's not high pressure. The last thing you want is a salesperson that feels like they're a used car salesman, right? And there's a lot of those out there. So you don't want that type of pressure off of it. And and just integrity with the company. And if the salesperson, whether it's a VAR or whatever, is upfront, and if they have the right solution, they tell you, or if it meets your use case and those sort of things, and then trying to get you the best price. So saying that this is the only price that we can get, that's probably not a good answer, and you're probably not going to get a lot of sales there. We all know there's a retail price, there's a end of quarter price, there's a end of year price, right? So just be upfront about that. And because if you're wanting to sell something, you need to be looking at it as a partnership, and to try to rake me over the coals on pricing is not going to give you a long-term thing, especially if you're in a subscription model, because at the end of that term, we'll be looking for, what other options are out there at that time. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And before moving on, I keep thinking about a James Bond villain. With you sitting right there with the cat behind you, and I can't get over it. It's just it's so funny. Yeah. I'm not sure if we can share that or not, but maybe we'll include it in the teaser. But
Yeah, one of my teammates here just yesterday said that they're waiting for me to be on the call and just petting my cat, as like someone evil, So
exactly.
yeah, he's definitely my buddy here during the day. So.
Well, um, well, let's see. Where was I? Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you had any other CISOs in the industry that you look up to, if you wanted to name drop a few of those.
Yeah, here locally, Gary Harbison, I love listening to him speak whenever he's with Bear, and he's really interesting to listen to. There's I like listening. He's not a CISO, but and we kind of mentioned him earlier, Steve Gibson from Gibson Research. He's got the Security Now podcast. I never met him, but just his perspective on security and everything, I really like his. And there's, gosh, I got such a great network. I hate calling out anyone in particular. So it's there's Kevin Hardcastle. He's a great guy. He's been through seen a lot in the business, and really helps give back to the community as well. And gosh, I don't know. I can't. I've gone blank.
That's fine. I mean, the larger the network that you have, it's more difficult to come up with specific names. That's understandable. Is there any way, and we've touched about this previously with, building relationship first, but is there any way that vendors can actually connect with you in a non-intrusive manner?
I think the easiest way is through LinkedIn, and to reach out via LinkedIn. And, I got a pretty significant network there and following. And, like I said, the best way, reach out, build that relationship. I try to answer whenever I can. And, if you have a product, toss it out there on the information. And if there's something that I need That's usually where I go to first is my contacts in LinkedIn. Let me take that back. I got my main vendors I go to see if they have anything, but I'll also reach out to LinkedIn and see what other competitors compared to what my vendors have. And that's where I would, can easily pull up the information and look at it and see if you're a right fit. And then I can reach out to you through LinkedIn and get to it. But I think the big thing is don't ask for 10 to 15 minutes of my time, when you do that, because, I don't have it. My schedule is crammed all the time. And so, just provide me with the information and I will reach out. And, I always say, it's like, well, I know somebody that has this. And so whether it's for me or for somebody else, excuse me, I will forward the name over or whatever. So, it pays to, just provide the information. So.
Okay, so LinkedIn as the main means of communication. Is there one thing that you could single out as the most important thing to you in your career?
I think the not saying no has been the biggest thing. That when I've had an opportunity to come across of, hey, can you do this? And if I knew it or not, I would say yes, I could do it. And there was, especially in consulting, the way I learned so much so quickly was I would always say yes, and it'd be like, 2 days before having to do a job, and I'd be reading everything I could to learn about it, and spinning up a test environment or whatever it was. And so, just that constant learning and really just trying to tackle everything I could, and I think that's been the biggest thing to help drive me forward.
Okay. Before we wrap this up, I did want to ask you a couple of final questions here.
Sure.
Is there anything you've read or listened to recently that has inspired you? And I know you mentioned, some podcasts, but is there anything that you wanted to like single out that you could, that you could say about that was very inspiring to you lately?
There's always those little tidbit things of, hey, think about this, in your environment, or are you thinking about that? But nothing really major. So you might not want to do that one.
Sure, no problem there. Okay, if you had unlimited funds, what would you do with your life?
Oh, I'd travel. So, wife and kids, and we would go everywhere that we could. So, I wouldn't even care if it was, 5-star. That part I don't even care about, but just getting out and seeing the world. I hope when I retire and that sort of things, I hope I'm able to do all that. So
Yeah. Did you travel extensively or not
we've
yet?
we've traveled some, yeah. So we've traveled some, but definitely would like to travel more. So
Yeah.
especially after the COVID stuff, really, I think like a lot of people really itching to get out, but we want to be cautious when we do.
Yeah. Well, soon I think in the US, not sure about Europe. It's probably going to take some time before they're back on their feet. But and definitely, places like I don't know, like Thailand or Southeast Asia. I presume it's going to take a few years.
Mhm.
But hopefully soon we can get on the road again. Um, okay, Marc, I think we're just about to wrap this up. We're almost at the end of our time. And thank you so much for joining me in this podcast. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Hopefully, some of your answers would resonate and some of the listeners out there could learn about your path and maybe even learn from your experience. So thank you
Yeah.
again for joining.
Thank you for having me.